Hi again. This is our second brief lecture related to Chapter 8. Our Chapter 8 has to do with planning processes and the planning techniques, planning development. Before I begin with discussions of the different types of plans as well as the different approaches to planning, I am just going to revisit the planning process again because I want to ensure that you fully understand that as we go on. The planning process, as we said, starts with defining our objectives. Essentially, they are where we would like to be. We're not there yet. These are goals, aspirations, objectives that we want to actually fulfill in the future. And so the first basic step of any planning process is determining where we want to be, where we want to go in the future. Okay, I said one of the objectives for you as a student right now would be graduation. That's where you see yourself. That is the vision. I want to graduate. And then the next step is to determine where you are in relationship to this. So it's where I want to go. And the second step is where do I stand now? Where am I? How far away from that objective am I? What sorts of things do I need to do to accomplish that objective? What do I do well and what do I perhaps not do so well? That's looking at myself internally and deciding where I am right now. Determining where I am right now. After that, we look at the environment, and that helps us to appreciate and understand what's going on in our world, what's likely to help us to get where we want to go, and what's likely to present an obstacle. This is a really, really important stage because it helps us to plan for potential eventualities, and we're going to see a little bit of that when we discuss in the second brief lecture things like contingency planning and scenario planning. And so we look for future conditions and try to anticipate those, plan for those. And then the next step is to analyze, evaluate all the possible approaches, all the possible, for example, in your graduation objective, all the types of classes that we can take, all the different courses, all the different majors and minors, and determine what is the best plan for you, what are the best steps, how are we going to realize that objective, and do those steps accordingly to effectively realize our objective. So that's what you go. You look at all of these potential steps and you choose the ones that are going to be most effective for you based upon where you are, what you can do and cannot do, and what is in your environment. That is, how am I going to get there? So the first part is, where do I want to go? Secondly is, where do I stand right now? Thirdly is, how will I get to my goal? And the fourth deal is implementing the plan and evaluating results. The last step, that has to do with, how will I know when I have achieved my goals? And how will I know if I am on the path to achieving my goals? Am I following my plan effectively? That is the the planning process as it relates to beginning from your objectives and ending at your implementation. And then also we can look at the relationship again between planning and the other management stages or management functions. And we said planning allows us to set that direction. That then influences the type of organizational structures we create, how we will actually go about realizing those objectives, what are the steps that we'll take, what will it look like. It also provides us with some level of motivation and incentive. If you remember, planning gives us action orientation, and in terms of organizing, it gives us that focus and that flexibility. And then lastly, it gives us the ability to coordinate and control our activities, evaluate whether or not we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and take corrective action as necessary. So planning influences the whole management process. So I just wanted to remind you of this before we go on in this chapter. So let's go on. And we're going to look now at types of plans. And if I asked you, basically, what are your goals in terms of your life? Many of you will speak about goals that you hope to achieve maybe in the next year or 2 years. That is very common, especially for college students, because you seem to live in the here and now. Well, there are different types of plans, and just like you, businesses have short-term plans, which typically cover about 1 year or less, and they have long-term plans where they're looking into 3 or more years. Universities, for example, have short-term and long-term plans. There are things the University Xavier wants to do for this year coming, and we have plans that we want to achieve in maybe the next 3 to 5 years. The Division of Business, which I am part of, we have plans for the following year. There are certain courses that we want to create, maybe an MBA program that we want to devise and have up and running in the next year. But in 3 years, we're looking towards maybe creating ourselves as a college of business, perhaps having more international programs and devising an international center. Those are our types of long-term plans. You're going to have an opportunity to tell me a little bit about that in the discussion forum for this chapter. Most of us, as I said, we look kind of in the short term, maybe 3 months. Few of us, a year. Very few of us look at 20 years. Almost nobody concerns themselves with plans for 20 years. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially in today's volatile environment. It used to be that firms, when they created strategy, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, when firms created strategy, it was created as a 20-year plan. Well, that's a little bit nonsensical, especially in today's environment. The amount of change, we talked about the level of uncertainty that had related to it, the rate of change and the level of complexity, and that's very high for many industries and many firms in those industries. And so firms are shortening their time span when they plan. So 20 years is kind of out. Maybe 5 years is the new long term, and maybe even 3 years is the new long term for many organizations. I just mentioned the term strategic plans. You may have heard this term used many times, especially in sports or even in war. You will hear coaches and leaders talk about strategies. Well, a strategic plan or a strategy is a set of broad, comprehensive, long-term action directions for the entire organization, whether that organization be a team, the organization be a military unit, or the organization be, in this case, a business organization. What it says there, it's a set of broad, comprehensive. Comprehensive means that it covers the entire organization. So, for example, Xavier University as an organization has a strategic plan. It has a vision and a mission for the entire organization. Where does Xavier University want to be in the future? And what is it going to take, and what will it do as it tries to accomplish that vision, the mission, if you will, of Xavier University? Why do we exist? And that strategy is for the entire university. It is a plan that we have that the entire university should be working towards. When you think about an organization like Amazon, Amazon has set itself a very, very challenging and ambitious mission to be the #1 global marketplace in the entire world. And so in order to do that, it is going to have to rely on all of its different parts of the organization that we'll talk about in a little bit, to ensure that it reaches that very challenging goal. Its strategy is then based upon the entire organization. When I teach business strategy, and some of you will take it if you are in the division of business, I let my students use a company, a fictitious company, but they have to set a strategy, a long-term plan of action for an organization. What do you want this organization to be? Do you want it to be the innovator in the market? Do you want it to come out with the new and best types of products? Do you want it to be the cost leader? Do you want it to be the organization that gives consumers the most affordable products? Or do you want it to be the customer-oriented company that creates customized products for specific types of consumers? And that plan, that strategy, in essence, is a direction for the entire organization. Every part of the organization has to work and contribute to realizing that comprehensive plan. And the last aspect is the long-term direction, the long-term orientation. Strategies are normally not realized in a few months. They take years to actually be accomplished because they require intensive resources, and because many times the initial investments do not bring about direct specific rewards. They take some time to materialize into rewards. That's why a strategy is not for today, but it is not to see necessarily the benefit of today, but it is for the long term. Think about it in terms of a game plan. You see coaches running certain game plays in a game, doing certain things. All of that is meant to, at the end of the game, when all the plays have been finished, that the organization, that team will win. So you don't necessarily see the benefits of a strategy in the early parts or phases of a game, but you should see the benefit at the end. A good example of this, I don't know, many of you might be too young to remember this, but Muhammad Ali very, very famously fought George Foreman. I believe it was in the 1970s, and he beat George Foreman. It was called the Rumble in the Jungle. He beat George Foreman. He used a specific strategy that has become somewhat famous in boxing. It was called the rope-a-dope. And in the early rounds of that boxing match, Muhammad Ali basically lay on the ropes, protected himself while George Foreman punched the living daylights out of him. The reason that he did that was to basically get George Foreman into a state of wariness. George Foreman was much stronger than Muhammad Ali, but Muhammad Ali was much fitter than George Foreman. And so Muhammad Ali realized that the best strategy, the best alternative or plan of action for him would not be to try to beat George Foreman in the first round, go head to head with him, but was to try to get George Foreman as wary as possible. And he did that, and he saw the benefits of it in the later rounds where he was able to knock George Foreman out. But if you were looking at it in the initial rounds, you would think, oh, Muhammad Ali is doing terrible. Well, it was his strategy, and it was a long-term strategy. He sacrificed the short-term gain in order to get the long-term benefit. In order, as we said, strategies are comprehensive plans, and they are then therefore comprised of all the different parts of the organization working together. And so therefore, in order to realize these strategic plans, these long-term plans, each one of these specific parts, they have to play a part, and they normally have their individual plans that contribute to the strategic plans, and those are called tactical plans. So tactical plans are the specific plans of the different parts of the organization that help or contribute to the overall strategic plan. And if you want to think of it in terms of, again, sports teams, you might see, let's say, LSU or the New Orleans Saints. The head coach has a general strategy for the entire football team. But each area of the team, they will have their own plans. And those plans should contribute to the general strategic plan that the head coach is. So maybe special teams, they have their plan. The defensive players have a plan. The offensive players have a plan. All of those tactical plans, things that will be done to contribute to the general strategic plan, if they're done effectively, then they will help the organization further their strategic activity. They will help the organization to realize their strategic goals. Think about it in terms of Xavier University. We're made up of different colleges, right? And each one of those colleges will have their own tactical plan. They will have their own tactical plan, and they, following those plans, doing certain things in their colleges, will help Xavier University to realize its vision, its strategic plan. In an organization, normally the areas or the parts of the organizations that follow tactical plans are the functions of the organizations. For example, the production function or finance, facilities, logistics, marketing. All of these are functional areas. They accomplish specific functions, specific activities in the organization that helps the organization to create and sell valuable products and services. And they will have specific tactics, things that they will do, activities that they will follow that will lead to the strategic success of the organization. So Apple has a strategic plan to be the #1 innovator, let's say in the tablet industry. Well, the marketing department or marketing function of Apple contributes to that through its tactics in terms of the way it advertises, the types of advertisements it uses, the way that it markets the product, the approach to marketing. All of those things contribute tactically to the general strategic plan. If you want to think about it, this term is often used in war. And so the entire military will have a strategy. This is what we're going to do in order to capture this country or to capture this land. And the different parts of the military, the Air Force, the Army, they will all each have their tactical plans that they will do individually that will contribute to the general strategic plan. So the Air Force will come in and perhaps bomb, and then the infantry will march in after that. They will all have their plans that will contribute to the strategic. So think about it, strategic is the overlying plan for the entire organization. The tactical plans are the subset, the individual plans of the parts of the organizations that build together, kind of like transformers, if you will, to realizing that general strategic plan. And then even at a lower level, below the tactical plans is the operational plans. And whereas tactical plans are for one specific unit in the organization, operational parts are for even smaller subunits in the organization. And those are the everyday short-term plans. What do we need to do to keep this going day by day? And so we talk about things like policies, which are kind of our guidelines for doing the things. These are really the nitty-gritty of management, if you will, procedures and budgets. They keep us on pace. They keep us implementing the tactical and the strategic plan day to day. Certain things like how do we teach classes, the number of online classes we're offering, the types of courses we're offering, how do we go about grading and making sure students are being recruited effectively. All of these, daily activities that don't seem very attractive or don't seem very strategic, aren't necessarily strategic, but definitely contribute to the overall strategy. So it kind of goes like this. At the very top, we have strategic. That's the hierarchy, very top. Below that, we have our tactical, which is made up of the specific divisions. And below that, even below in those divisions, there are these sub-departments or sub-units that do the daily activities. You could think about them as the soldiers on the ground. They follow the orders of the tacticians above them that follow the orders of the strategic. So we have at the very top of the military, you have the president. The president tells the commanders, and the commanders tells the officers or the sergeants, whoever is leading those men and women on the field, specifically what needs to be done day by day, hour by hour, in order to realize our tactics and then promote our strategy. There are certain types of tools and techniques that we can actually use when we planning. One of them is forecasting, and it's basically an attempt to predict the future. We're always trying to do that in business because it helps us by predicting the future or attempting to predict the future to reduce the level of uncertainty in our environment. It helps us to be somewhat more prepared for what is going to happen. And so many times when we're going into uncharted territories, we're trying to get an idea about what we should expect. Well, one way of doing that is to kind of go through or kind of use qualitative forecasting. Well, what is that? Well, it's using expert opinions. It's asking those that we think will be most knowledgeable about these things and asking them what they think we should do and what is the best or the most likely scenario for what we're attempting to do. So that's what we do when we forecast using qualitative forecasting. So let's say you were thinking about opening up a business, and you were thinking about opening up a business in New Orleans. Let's say getting was a restaurant in New Orleans. Well, you might go to someone who knows a little bit about the restaurant industry and a little bit about the market in this part of the world, and you might talk to them and say, tell me about what's going on here. Tell me about the kinds of trends that are likely to happen? What do you think is going to happen to demand for this type of food next year? Or, what are the customers like, liking this, gravity? What do they need? That's using an expert. Oftentimes you use an expert when you don't have a lot of information, you don't have data, you don't have access to that. So you kind of use when a situation is new, perhaps, when there isn't that much information available, you tend to fall or rely, I should say, upon experts. But many times organizations now especially utilize information and the data that they have access to, and they do some measure of quantitative forecasting. Right now I'm teaching a class on quantitative methods, and in this class I demonstrate to my students how they can create mathematical models to help explain or help decide where or what types of business decisions they can take. So for example, when businesses choose where they will locate their new operations, let's say in that restaurant, when Denny's is trying to determine where in New Orleans it wants to open its next location, well, they can go ask an expert. They can go ask someone in the, that's in this area or who has had a franchise before, find out what they think, where's the best place. But most times they will use mathematical modeling, and they would have devised perhaps a mathematical formula or expression based upon things like number of consumers that eat breakfast. They might look at income levels. They might look at proximity to other restaurants, competitors, as well as other Denny's, and they will devise this mathematical model to help them to forecast where is the best place to predict what is most likely to happen if they were to locate their new Denny's in X or locate it in Y. We live in New Orleans, so many times you will have experiences with hurricanes. And when you see those models, those hurricane models with those squiggly spaghetti lines, I guess they call them, those are forecasts. And what they are based upon mathematical modeling. They have certain variables in place, and they plug in information, and that's what gives you those lines. It basically tries to or attempts to predict where hurricanes are likely to go. So that's what we do in forecasting. We're trying to determine what is likely to happen in the future. So we're forecasting perhaps what demand will likely be. We're forecasting what would be perhaps the best location, what is likely to be the outcome in terms of profitability, things of that nature. Trying to, again, maybe even forecasting what our competitors are likely to do if we were to act in a certain way. That's forecasting. That is trying to determine the future, trying to determine what is likely to occur. And we can use qualitative, we can ask someone, we can base our decisions upon some expert opinion, or we can try to use information and more scientific mathematical modeling to do that. Another tool that is often used in planning is what we call contingency planning. And I would assume that a lot of you may have contingency planning or may have done contingency planning in the past. And what it is identifying alternative course of action to take when things go wrong. So it's a quick and easy example of a contingency plan might be an alternative route. Let's say you were going to a place, it was very important, and you had a specific route chosen. But in case something were to happen at that road, let's say there was traffic or there was a situation where the road was blocked, then you had some alternative way to get to your final destination. That is contingency planning. What you're doing there is you're trying to anticipate changing conditions. So let's say you get to a point and you realize, oh, the traffic's backed up. Well, at that point, which is called a trigger point, you resort to your contingency plan. Okay? Pilots often will have contingency plans in place. They will have a specific method of flying, a specific route perhaps, but if things were to go wrong, if they were to lose an engine or something like that, they have plan B, plan C. Hopefully they have plan B or plan C, because if they don't, then we are likely, or the passengers are all likely to suffer. So you want to have contingency plans. Firms want to have contingency plans in place. They want to prepare for eventualities and have things in place if they were to occur, because if they don't prepare for those things in their planning, when or if those things occur, they will be unprepared and they are likely to not act wisely and effectively to those changes. Okay, so contingency planning is key when you are making your initial plans. Yes, some of those things may never happen, but it is always good to have a backup plan, and that's what you're doing with contingency planning. Scenario planning is similar to contingency planning, but it's a more longer term version of contingency planning. A lot of times companies are doing this right now, especially in when environments are highly volatile. They're looking at things like, what will happen to business if the price of oil stays the same, or if we resort to more alternative energy and that hurts oil, or what will happen if the economic recession continues for 3 or 4 years. It is trying to create longer term contingency plans. So if this were to occur, this is what we'll do. If that was to occur, trying to anticipate these future scenarios. And again, organizations are attempting to do that to reduce the effect of shocks. They're trying to eliminate as much as possible the huge impacts that shocks, being unprepared for shocks, major change in the environment can have. They're trying to smooth that out by having plans in place initially, and also helping them to be more flexible so that when or if these shocks occur, they will be better prepared and they will be more flexible in terms of adapting to it. They won't have to wait or try to create or devise a plan reactively, and those plans aren't necessarily always the best plans, but they will have something in place already. So these are like more longer term contingency plannings, if you will. And then benchmarking is another tool that organizations can use. It's using external and internal comparisons to plan for future improvements. So many times when we're trying to identify objectives and trying to identify ways or approaches to doing certain things, we often will look at those that are similar to us to identify types of goals that we should have. And we also look to those in our industry, in our environment, that have done things well and identify what we often call their best practices. Their best practices, things that people have done well that have led to superior performance. So what is the best way of doing this? So at Xavier University, perhaps, when we are creating courses or designing certain classes, I know I try to do this myself, I will look at professors that have really good classes, that have gotten really good feedback, and try to incorporate some of the things that they've done into my classes. That's using best practices. That's helping me to plan by utilizing information that may come from within my organization, but oftentimes comes from outside of my organization. That's benchmarking. Trying to find things to measure yourself against, trying to give yourself goals, trying to set standards that you will aspire to. So these are some of the examples of planning tools and techniques that managers can use in their organization to help with the planning process.